Hey, what's up, guys? Happy to be back with you. I have another video that sort of goes along with the blog post today, talking here again about national pastime and some of the interesting things that are involved with it. So what the question today is, how do we know the national pastime is based on the 1930 season cards, or the cards were created based on the 1930 season statistics? And we're going to look into that a little bit closer. So first of all, we're going to go into sort of what we know, or what we tend to think that we know. This is from the APBA journal, October-November 1976. This is from page 4. Here, Clifford Van Beek is referred to as Clayton West for a variety of reasons. They didn't want to use his real name. I think that they were a little bit too concerned about this, but there was a lot of talk about what J. Richard Seitz thought about all of this and all of that. He was pretty upset that word was getting out that APBA wasn't necessarily a game that he completely created himself. So it says right here, National Pastime game was produced by the Major Games Company and first appeared in 1930, which is correct. All of the cards are based on the 1930 season, with the exception of Rogers Hornsby, who sat out most of the year but received a card based on his defined 1929 season. I'm assuming this comes directly from Van Beek. And then it says West, so this would be Clifford Van Beek, used the Sporting News' official baseball guide of 1930 to obtain statistics for the cards he produced. All right, we have a problem with that statement right there, right? And the problem is that whether you fully understand this or not, the problem is that Clifford Van Beek could not use the Sporting News Baseball Guide for 1930 because there was no such thing. The first Sporting News Baseball Guide came out in 1942, right? 1930 was still the Spalding and Reach guides. This was a couple of years before the Spalding and Reach guides combined, and they combined because there were some issues that were happening with the economics behind publishing baseball guides. And so the first thing that we're going to look into is we're going to see if we can figure out whether Clifford Van Beek could have had access to the 1931 guides. Now, let's see if I can find this here. Yes, here it is. The big problem that we have, and this is the problem that I think a lot of people who've investigated this haven't fully realized, is that the first advertisement for National Pastime comes out here. So this is the Sporting News. I don't know if you can see this clearly or not. This says St. Louis, December 11th, 1930, right? And if we scroll down through all of this talk about Rogers Hornsby with the Cubs spring training, only 1 week to go in the fascinating picture contest that they ran. They did a lot of stuff like that during the Depression to try to get people to continue buying papers. It didn't work as well as the Sporting News history would make you think. When we go all the way back here to page 8, this is the page where the advertisement shows. Now, when you look at this at first, you're thinking, what are you talking about? There's no advertisement here. You go down to the bottom, and you can see, okay, there's an investment securities advertisement for St. Louis. There's this really, really small advertisement for the Umpire School, and this is the National Pastime ad, right? That is how small it is. People, I think, don't always realize that this is the case, but this is the one ad for National Pastime that appeared in the Sporting News. And for some reason, my PDF reader is not letting me make it bigger. Let's see here. We can make it up to 125%. You going to do that? Apparently not. For whatever reason, we're stuck at 60.8%. Any rate, you're not going to be able to read this fully for whatever reason. This thing's decided to glitch out on me. But it says here, play this new game, National Pastime, blah, 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 blah. An ideal Christmas gift for man or boy. Order now. Shipment will be made the day order is received. I take that to mean that Van Beek had games on hand right then. That if you had made an order on, I don't know, I'm assuming that the Sporting News back then still came out on the day that it claimed to come out, or it may have come out a couple days before the date. Either way, I'm assuming that if on December 12th you sent in an order, Van Beek would have the game there and he would ship it to you, right? That's how I read this. That's how I understand what that means. What that means, in other words, is that we have to be able to get the stats in Clifford Van Beek's hand before December 11th, 1930. He has to have the time to process them and to make the cards. And as anybody who's ever made those cards will tell you, it's not that easy. So the first thing that we do is we say, well, we're going to look at what he told us, right? He told us that he had a copy of the baseball guide. Well, unfortunately, the baseball guide didn't come out that early, right? So this is from, this is the earliest reference to the Spalding baseball guide of 1931 I could find. This comes from the Lewiston Evening Journal in Maine, page 10, March 26, 1931. And you can see here this handsome ad here at the Wells Sporting Good Company in Auburn, Maine. 1931 Spalding official baseball guide out today. So you're not getting that before March 26, 1931, right? And we're going to go look over here. This is from South Carolina. This is the Columbia record, April 20th, 1931. This is the column by Frank Barfield, who says, for some unknown reason, the Reach official American League Baseball Guide of 1930 has been very late this season. The mailbag, which brings the fanning and panning letters, contained a complimentary copy of the baseball guide this morning. And then blah, 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 it's a handy reference book, so on and so forth. So the Reach Guide wasn't out until April 20th. Funny thing about this is that the 1931 season had already begun. I'm guessing that there were some problems in terms of the Great Depression and the impact that had. So you say, okay, well, that's perfectly fine, right? Maybe it wasn't, maybe he misremembered Van Beek, who was like 70-something when he gave interviews for these articles, right? Maybe he was sort of thinking the wrong thing, and maybe he went instead to the Sporting News itself to get this information. So I spent some time looking that up. This is the Sporting News from December 4th, 1930. And when we scroll down here through this, we go to page 5. This is 1 week, by the way, before the advertisement shows up. This is where we finally see the statistics for the American League. This is only the American League statistics. And you can see here as you zoom in, let's see if this actually lets me zoom in. It might not. Yeah, so it worked kind of this time. Got me to 60.6%, not so great. You can see that you have stats for at-bats, runs, hits, total bases, doubles, triples, home runs, sacrifice hits, and stolen bases. You have just about everything you would need to create national pastime cards. And over here, for players who have batted in 10 or more runs, there are stats for walks, hit by pitch, RBIs, and strikeouts, which are the other little stats that you kind of need to create national pastime cards. In theory, he could use this with one big problem, which is that this is only the American League, right? So if we want to see the National League, we have to go over here. See, this is the way that I've sort of saved these things up. So this is from January 1st, 1931, and here are the same National League statistics with also the same thing about less than 10 games. They put the fielding stats here on the same page. For the paper that we just looked at, those fielding stats didn't come out until the December 11th issue, which had the National Pastime advertisement. So in theory, Van Beek could have used this, but you'd have to believe that, he was sort of lying to his potential audience to say that, oh, I'll send this to you right away. And in reality, they were going to have to wait like months and months and months to get it. I don't think that that's true. I don't think that that's true at all. Now there's one other option that I thought of that could allow him to use the 1930 statistics, and that is to use local newspaper statistics, because the local newspapers did keep track of batting and some of these stats, right? So when we look at this here, this is from the Chicago Tribune. I can't get any Milwaukee newspapers from 1930 or from any time. That's because of ProQuest. That's going to be a different video. I have a lot of things to rant about them. However, as far as Chicago is concerned, you could get the official stats, right? This is from the Chicago Tribune, the Sunday Tribune, because of course it's going to be on Sunday. October 5th, 1930, you can see that the World Series was being played at the time. When we go down here to page 30 of the paper, we can see the final unofficial National League averages, which contain some individual batting averages, but not many. In fact, not enough for the complement of national pastime teams and players. That's a problem. When we turn the page to page 31, we will see the same statistics here, final American League averages. And again, there's not enough for national pastime. There's just simply not enough. There are not enough players there available. So that really kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit. Now, it is always possible that Clifford Van Beek pulled like an early Bill James and that he went through the Sporting News and he started tallying stuff up on his own. But again, that's sort of like a conspiracy theorist's answer to this problem, right? Because you look at this and you think, why would he have to do that if the guide is going to come out anyway, right? The only reason why we have to get something in his hands that existed before December 11th, 1930 is because that's when the ad came out. It's pretty obvious to me that he was going for the Christmas 1930 buying season. I don't think that it worked, in large part because I think most kids weren't thinking about baseball in December. They were thinking about football. He should have made a football game instead. But hindsight is 20/20. There is one other choice. So I don't have a copy of the 1931 baseball guides. I do, however, have access through the Library of Congress to a scan of the 1930 Spalding Guide. And the 1930 Spalding Guide, if you can see here, we have, here's your National League batting records that include doubles, triples, home runs, blah, blah, blah. When we start scrolling through these pages, we will come here. Okay, we want to go past players that hit less than 10 games. For starters and major players, there are also statistics for their runs batted in. We don't care so much about that, but walks and strikeouts and hit by pitch ratings, right? That's pretty important. That's probably where those figures come from for National Pastime, I would guess. There's pitching statistics. We'll talk about that a little bit later. There's fielding statistics. We can talk about that later as well. There's also another important thing here too, though, which is this. So if you look at a National Pastime card, you'll see that all of the players, the positions are listed as pitcher, catcher, infield, or outfield, which is a little bit odd. There's no fielding system, right? But it's a little bit odd that we didn't put on that they are a second baseman or that they're an outfielder, or I'm sorry, a left fielder or something like that. It was just outfield, infield, catcher, pitcher. I've wondered for a long time why that is. This is the reason why. It's because he took it straight from the Spalding guide, and this is what he took. So there you go. There is the answer to your mystery. I believe fully that Clifford Van Beek created a National Pastime based on the 1929 statistics that he got from the official Spalding baseball guide. I think, so you can go on the blog, you can see the photo of this. I think that he played the game himself at the same time that he was doing the research. Or I'm sorry, that the season was going on, 1930. I think he played the game himself. I think that he followed some of the roster moves, and I have a suspicion that the game that he sold in the end featured some of those roster moves kind of built in, but really that the statistics were based on the 1929 season. That's how he was able to get it out early enough. And I think he just used the Spalding guide. That's why I think you have pitcher, catcher, infielder, and outfielder. That's the thing, at least to me, that makes the most sense. Still, it's kind of a shame, I've said this before, that it didn't work so well for him in the Christmas season. Now, my suspicion is that J. Richard Seitz probably got the National Pastime game as a Christmas present, Christmas 1930. There are other reasons to suspect that, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we start looking at the league that Seitz had and what information at least was released about it by the APBA Journal, and we start looking at how far along that was played and things like that. Basically, these kids had to have time to play a full season because that's what they did. And that's why I think that it's absolutely true that Seitz probably had the game before 1931, the year 1931 started, or like right at the beginning of the year. Anyway, that's my thought on it. Love to hear what you have to think about it. Pretty interesting stuff. I have been fascinated with looking at this for quite some time. I have more ideas and more videos and more articles coming up about National Pastime and all of this stuff in the near future. Yeah, I mean, sort of in closing, I want to say that it's very easy for us to forget that at the time there was no Macmillan Baseball Encyclopedia. There was definitely no baseball reference, no retro sheet. It was not easy to come across these statistics, right? And if you were trying to get something to work at some level of granularity, which is exactly what Van Beek was doing, it was a little bit tricky. It was a little bit hard. J. Richard Seitz had similar problems when he started to try card making and was looking for sources of statistics. In fact, we know that Hal Richmond had the same problems, right? And we know that Hal Richmond had to figure out sort of a way to get it. I think it was the LES Sports Bureau to get the lefty-righty splits so he could get that little bit of extra put into the Strat-O-Matic advanced game that would make it stand out from the competition. We have to remember that because we look at it now and we think, oh, it's easy. You just click here and you get all the information you want. Wasn't like that back then, especially not in 1930. Anyway, that's it from me. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.